The concept of a good design is seemingly a subjective one. What one deems as good or bad varies from person to person. To make such determinations, many approaches can be taken. An intersubjective approach would rely on popular opinions. With this approach, one could limit the scope to esteemed art and cultural critics, or expand to the general population. Nevertheless, we run into conflicts when defining what could be deemed as good. If we are to limit the scope, as said previously, to esteemed art and cultural critics, or to the general population, we may run into the dilemma of a high culture versus low culture mentality. Sociologically speaking, high culture is a lifestyle enjoyed by those of a particular class, usually upper class, wealthy socialites that indulge in expensive products. Low culture or pop culture is ascribed as a culture that appeals to the commoner. In his book, The Critique of Judgment, epistemologist philosopher Immanuel Kant attempts to quantify beauty with some objective measure. Kant makes the intersubjective assertion that there are universal tropes that define beauty. He writes, quote, "In all judgments by which we describe anything as beautiful, we allow no one to be of another opinion, without, however, grounding our judgment on concepts but only on our feeling, which we therefore place at its basis not as a private but as a communal feeling." Unquote. This results in Kant defining the objectivity of beauty itself by essentially stating that it is an aggregate of subjective appeals. In other words, there are shared elements between people when they attempt to define a beauty standard. Kant further explains that any deviation between these shared elements can be defined as taste, which is, in his view, purely subjective. However, when examining Kant's standard of an objective beauty, you may ask if it's arbitrary to make a formal distinction between beauty and taste, in the sense that the former is objective and the latter is subjective. If we are to presuppose that objective beauty is simply shared individual standards amongst people, could we not apply this same rationale to taste? An objective beauty would make sense if and only if we were to reach the basics or frameworks of design. For example, one could say that for something to be beautiful, it must exist as an object in space or concept, or that it must be observable. Kant reaches this objective approach by making reductionist arguments that work in a vacuum, but not in the real world. An example for this is African art and how it was perceived in Victorian England. Many thought the art was ugly. Sometime later, during the Edwardian era, the public saw these works of art as beautiful and insightful. The mere fact that it was acknowledged as art is also astounding. Here, Kant may argue that there was no change in beauty standards for these artworks, but rather the public had a more palatable taste for this type of art. Nevertheless, could this be a legitimate argument? If we are to assume that objective values of a particular body of artwork is the same throughout time due to universal laws, could an argument be made that these objective constants were perceived as bad at one point in time and then good? Here, beauty is no longer a standard of good or any quality, but rather constants or aspects that are just merely perceived and interpreted. This, of course, is too much of a quagmire because objective reasoning requires us to be devoid of personal opinions. Under an objective supposition, we ought to be more scientific in our conclusions. That being said, there is no inherent beauty where things just are. That is, if we are to speak about beauty in the sense of what is palatable. If we are to base objective proofs on intersubjective agreement, such as Kant is doing with his definition of objective beauty, the result is null. For me, when I attempt to define a good design, I find myself taking the angle, what is the design's purpose? And how well did the design achieve this purpose? Say for instance, an artist makes a sculpture with the aim of making people cry, but instead people laugh. Granted, everything is interpreted differently when cultural influences are at play, and what can be considered good can change at any time. There need not be any objective standard. That being said, a good design to me is one that successfully achieves purpose within its genre. According to German industrial designer Dieter Rams, a good design is one that is innovative, useful, aesthetic, understandable, unobtrusive, honest, long-lasting, thorough down to the last detail, environmentally friendly, and involves as little design as possible. I tend to agree with Dieter Rams on his assertions, specifically on the aspect of a good design needing some sort of aesthetic. Here I understand Rams doesn't mean it in the simplistic sense. Of course, all designs have an aesthetic when examined, but Rams is essentially telling us that a good design has a contrasting aesthetic. It has this sort of freshness to it, perhaps barely seen in contemporarium. Furthermore, this aesthetic quality, according to Rams, should emphasize the usefulness of a product, whilst disregarding anything that could possibly detract from it. A quick glance at Rams's work shows that his designs have a functionalist approach. That is, the form of the design takes after its use. For example, a record player being played atop a circular platform on a rectangular pad rather than on a triangular platform. There is little to no conflict between shapes and how they accommodate each other's spaces. On the criterion of long-lasting influence, Rams intentionally leaves this open. Here we could interpret long-lasting as a single design being used for decades, or a design influencing many iterations. In either case, I agree with Rams on this assertion. However, much of his reasonings seem to be influenced by underlying biases on the criteria of environmentally friendly and involving little design as possible. It is clear that Data Rams appreciates minimalistic and eco-friendly designs. This should not be a requirement on achieving a good design. Certainly, there are other expressive ways to make mass appeal. Again, all of this is subjective. Recently, I've been toying with generative adversarial networks, or GAN for short. Essentially, I've been using artificial intelligence to create images from other images. This AI mixes elements of other images in order to create new ones. It also uses inputs from images it has seen, say of a car, and attempts to recreate them in different styles. Between these two morphs, there are about 300 plus frames of images. I call this a good design because of how innovative this technology is. Computer graphics technology has come a long way since the 60s, to the point where computers are creating images on their own with little input. Another thing about these morphs from the GAN AI is how it handles image perspectives and depths. There's an almost psychedelic feeling to each morph. You can actually see the AI attempt to be creative in a sense. Next up, I must give recognition to web design. One website in particular caught my eye for its simplicity and ease of use. One can almost say that they meet Data Rams' criteria of being long-lasting. This website is Wikipedia. Since its inception, Wikipedia has had the same consistent design, yet there is little design to the website. Much of the interface utilizes boxed information on a plain white background with black text. On a single Wikipedia article, parts may be sectioned off according to some taxonomy. This design functionally serves to limit potential distractions a user would face if the website were more complex and boastful. The font Wikipedia uses is sans serif, and much of the images are scaled proportionally when not in full view while reading an article. In the case of architectural design, I find myself thoroughly enjoying both brutalistic design as well as German Bauhaus. I personally find these two designs, the Giesel Library to the left and a building from Israel's White City to the right, to be opposites of one another in the sense that they are made out of different material and they have different architectural goals. The brutalist design of the Giesel Library aims to be more rough and showy. It generally looks harder with a concrete brick body. Angles jut out like cliffs. They can almost cut you. On the other hand, Bauhaus is much softer, and typically being made out of a hard white plaster of sorts. The Bauhaus design of the White City building has a light palette. When I look at Bauhaus architecture, I always think to myself that it's spacious, as if the room is swelled up with air. My appreciation of German Bauhaus doesn't end at architectural design. Interior Bauhaus also expresses the same openness. Bret Easton Ellis's American Psycho shows us the apartment of the film's subject, Patrick Bateman, an archetypal greedy yuppie who happens to be a psychopath. Like his colleagues, Patrick Bateman enjoys luxury items that, even for the sake of their simplistic design, scream a sense of ostentation. On a side note, the interior design of his apartment looks like much of Dieter Rams' own designs. Much of the design honors Rams' criterion of an item being honest, a functionalist notion. It is often said that art is used to express oneself. What better way of highlighting 90s yuppie culture than through the purchasing of expensive, simple stuff? As a comparison, this photo of interior Bauhaus design by Ludwig Maes van der Rohe shows similarities to Bateman's apartment. Furthermore, it carries much of the Bauhaus functionalist ethos present in Dieter Rams' criteria of a good design. In this Ludwig van der Rohe design, we see onyx being used for much of the interior design's main body, i.e. the floor and the walls. Objects have a sort of flexible feeling to them. The chairs seem to accommodate for the spinal curvature humans have when relaxing. Also, the environment still feels spacious. Some great product designs that I've come to enjoy are Google's phones, particularly Google Pixel 4, and the Apple AirPod iterations. The Google Pixel 4 has a nice slick design. The XL variant is rather large with a length of 6.3 inches and the non-XL at 5.7 inches. It comes in 3 colors, black, white, and what they name Oh So Orange. There isn't anything new in terms of the shape of the phone, other than the edges being somewhat rounder and easier to hold. The screen utilizes a QHD+ flexible OLED screen at around 537 ppi, which almost gives a sort of glossy look to everything it displays. A design that I was hoping for was for the stereo speakers to be present at the top of the phone. However, after thinking about it, that probably would have been too complex and ultimately would have detracted from its aesthetic quality. The phone follows Rams's criteria of being simple in the sense that it has little design and it's right to the point. The Apple AirPods are a genius design. Being made for listening to music, the AirPod is designed to fit comfortably in the human ear. Furthermore, they are wireless, which allows for people to roam freely within a certain range from their phone. Rams might see this functional use as honest and useful. In the realm of footwear, I find myself enamored by what Adidas has to offer. Two sub-brands to the Adidas brand that I enjoy are Kanye West's Yeezy brand sneakers and Pharrell Williams' Human Race sneakers. The archetypal design of a Human Race sneaker can be seen as some sort of a slanted quadrado. The tongue of the shoe is completely merged with the eyelet, creating an iconic low polygonal look. The Human Race sneakers come in many colors and variations as well, so there's a freedom when it comes to finding one that you like. In my opinion, I don't think Rams would like a shoe like this due to its seemingly complex and out there design. Take for example the laces. Functionally speaking, laces serve only to make a shoe fit better on a foot. The Human Race sneaker still keeps this in mind, however, the laces look awkwardly placed. They could have easily been replaced with ties to the sides of the shoe rather than being some sort of halfway mark between the two. So in a functionalist sense, that is a downside, albeit I appreciate the creativity. When it comes to Kanye West's Yeezy footwear, there are many variants. One variant I particularly enjoy are his Yeezy Boost 350s. The Yeezy Boost 350s have different versions, but a common trend among them is that they typically have prime knit upper bodies with varying patterns or designs. The bottom sole has an elevation to it that boosts the heel and slopes downward to the toe. The lacework is fairly conventional in that there isn't too much of a deviation from your typical shoe. The shoe comes in different colors during seasonal releases as well.